G'day there guys, and welcome back to another episode of r/Am I the Arsehole? With that said, let's get right into it. Am I the arsehole for not letting my nephew use my camper to have his own room? My sister and her husband fell on hard times because of the pandemic. They went from renting a nice house to having to rent from a friend. It was supposed to be temporary, but they've been in his house for an entire year, and he didn't have more than one room to spare to rent to them. I have a family of my own, and my house is full, so I didn't want them living with me. But I have a vintage camper trailer in my backyard, one of those small ones that they called a canned ham type. It's had various repairs over the years, including redoing the floor and ceiling, as well as getting a new axle, and it's in pretty decent condition for being over 50 years old. I take this camper on yearly trips with friends and on camping trips with my family, and I'm very anal about its upkeep. My sister, though, has asked to borrow the camper numerous times to put in her friend's backyard so her teenage son could have some privacy and use it as a personal bedroom. But I know my nephew. He's destructive with everything and would turn my camper into a total mess, and I'm certain they wouldn't want to give it back whenever I need it because he'd already be living in it. I know they can't simply go out and get a camper of their own because ones in usable condition are not cheap, and right now they're trying to save every extra dime to get back on their feet. Recently, my sister has gotten our parents involved, and they think that I should just lend them the camper, but I've still refused. They won't let up and seem to think that if they keep hounding me as a collective, that I will give in, but I haven't. My wife is on my side and has refused to let my sister and brother-in-law in when I wasn't home. They have a vehicle that can tow the camper, so I don't trust them not to take it if they can get in my backyard. My house also has cameras, and my sister and brother-in-law are aware of them now. They say I'm the asshole because I only use the camper a few times a year, and they need it now. But I worry that they wouldn't want to give it back, much less return it in the same condition. I firmly believe I'm in the right, but with my parents and sister constantly breathing down my neck, I thought I'd come here for an unbiased opinion. Am I the asshole for not lending them the camper? And info, I did suggest they get my nephew a tent, but they shot that idea down and called a tent temporary. If anything, that just felt like another red flag to me. And more info, our parents do not live close anymore. They moved several states away to retire a few years ago. And now in the comments, not the asshole, obviously. It's not like they're asking to borrow it for a few days, it would be indefinite. And like you said, he's messy and destructive. No way I'd let them take it. Honestly, even if the nephew weren't messy and destructive, the very fact that it would be for an indefinite amount of time would do it for me. This isn't a camper just rotting in the backyard, this is something OP uses. So if he wants to use it, while nephew is still using it, guess who would lose out? Just the fact that they've been in a one-bedroom for a full year, and between two adults, they couldn't save enough to organize getting a place, is enough that I would say no. The last thing I would want is to make them more comfortable. Not the arsehole. I think you're correct in believing that you would basically be giving them the camper. It's pretty bad that they seem to be considering stealing it from you. It's not much of a solution to their real problem. Also, instead of being made out of 2x4s, most campers are basically made out of popsicle sticks. They have to be babied, and I would not trust a teenager alone with one. Not the arsehole. It's your property, and you are perfectly within your rights to use it as you see fit. If you know that your nephew is destructive, then why on earth would you allow him unrestricted access to it? It's not your fault that his parents cannot provide for him. If your parents are concerned, then they can purchase a vehicle for them to use and stay in. If Beavis and Butthead have taught us anything, it's that teenagers should be kept away from campers and tool sheds. And OP says, you make a good point referencing Beavis and Butthead. When I was a kid, some of my friends did some pretty dumb stuff just from watching them. Back up to the post, we have an update. I showed my sister and brother-in-law this post after getting the verdict. My parents have seen it as well. They are all very unhappy with me, but my parents have backed off and say they won't bother me with it again. I also spoke with my sister alone and went through the rough estimates of what possible repairs to the camper would be, should my nephew damage it. My sister was not happy to see those numbers. Then I called her out on how they'd likely not want to return the camper when I need it, But they also tried to come to my house when I wasn't home to take it without permission, and I told her that I'd have no problem calling the police if they ever try that. My sister still tried to say that her son needs the camper, but when I went through the comments on this post with her, she became incredibly embarrassed and then got very angry. She left, saying that she wouldn't bother me for the camper anymore, but still stated that she thinks I'm a jerk. I didn't reply because I knew she was waiting to gaslight me. I just waved her goodbye and she left. My brother-in-law called me shortly after to yell at me, but he had no leg to stand on other than they want it. I told him that I would contribute $100 for a tent, but they're on their own for the rest. They actually agreed to the $100, so I guess my nephew is getting a tent to live in. I'd like to thank everyone here for all of their great advice. You gave me what I needed to end this problem. And now on to the update. Things went bad. Hi everyone. A few days ago, I saw an animation of my old post on YouTube and decided to log back on and give everyone an update. But I couldn't do it in the original subreddit where I first posted, and so I tried to post in another subreddit that banned me. So I've come here instead. I just want to say that things seemed to get better after I made my sister and brother-in-law give up on borrowing my camper. If they'd gotten their hands on it, I likely wouldn't have gotten it back anytime soon, short of getting police or a lawyer involved. They even tried to show up at my house to take the camper while I wasn't home, and my wife had to keep them out. I showed my last post to my sister, brother-in-law, and parents, and they were furious at me, but they let go of the fact that my camper was not up for grabs out of sheer humiliation and embarrassment. They had no real logical way to argue with me, especially after I brought up the amount of money that could end up being owed to me in repairs should they or my nephew damage the camper. That part made my sister extra sore at me. I thought we'd closed the book on this whole mess, but it seems closing one book only opened another one. Things went downhill very badly a bit over a month after my original post. So badly, I couldn't believe it was really happening. And yet, it did. Many here may not believe it either, but here is what happened. Some wondered if my sister and brother-in-law were actually going to use the $100 I gave them to get my nephew a tent to have his own space in the backyard. I admit that I had my doubts, but they followed through on getting him one. Our parents sent them some money as well, and they got my nephew a good-sized tent that he can have a cot to sleep on in, and a small amount of simple furniture. I personally donated the cot, as I had an old Coleman one sitting in my garage unused for years. I gave him a folding camping chair too. The boy got electricity in the tent via an extension cord from the main house. However, he frequently complained about the heat during the day and only had a couple of those little pseudo air conditioners that you just put water in to keep his tent cool. Though honestly, I doubt this situation would have been any different if he had had my camper, because it can get pretty hot inside of it too. Now on to what happened a bit over a month later. My sister and brother-in-law were evicted from their friend's house. Apparently, while there was trouble with my nephew needing his own space and being messy and defiant, they were having more trouble with a friend who was also their landlord. They tried to smooth things over by putting their son in the tent so he wouldn't be in the house much to avoid trouble. I suppose that might have worked, had my sister and brother-in-law not been caught with illegal drugs. And I mean the very bad ones. The kind that use a syringe. The friend/landlord went into their room while they were away and found their stash. That's why they were evicted. Suddenly it made sense why in 2 years they couldn't have afforded a small apartment to move into, despite both of them working full-time. Their extra cash just went right to their habits instead of saving it like they claimed to have been doing. Looking back, they did look a bit more unhealthy at the time, but I assumed it was due to stress, and not long after being outed, their habits put them behind bars. People who are on heavy drugs can go very wild in an instant, and that's exactly what happened. When their friend/landlord gave them an eviction notice for having found drugs in this house, my sister and brother-in-law both got physical with him, and he called the police. That scared them, and they locked themselves in their rented room. Meanwhile, my nephew was blissfully unaware of what was happening as he was just gaming alone in his tent. The friend/landlord pressed charges, and police soon arrested my sister and brother-in-law because there were indoor security cameras that caught the whole altercation. I was very surprised about what happened when I heard about it. I got a call from the police station, and I was asked to take in my nephew since he could no longer stay where he was. Since our parents' estate's away and living in a retirement community, they couldn't take him in. So it was up to me, and I did so. I wasn't particularly fond of my nephew, but I realized his upbringing really did not help our relationship, nor did the fact that my sister and I don't really get along. We brought his tent over to my place and set it up in my backyard. He's still living in it, even though we've cleared the attic out for him. But he says that he likes the tent better because it feels like his own little house where he can just be himself. We even added a mini fridge that I bought for him in there so he can have cold drinks when he wants them. Currently, we're still working on becoming my nephew's permanent legal guardians. My sister and brother-in-law are both facing heavy charges. They assaulted a man, resisted arrest, and were in possession of illegal drugs. From jail, though, they've actually been very cooperative, albeit while dealing with withdrawal from no longer being able to self-medicate. I've been to see my sister, and she said that she and her husband were so out of it on the day that it happened, they don't even remember attacking their friend. I don't know if they're faking memory loss to try and get a lesser punishment, or if they really were that high, but I suppose that it doesn't matter. It changes nothing since there was CCTV showing the attack. They are looking into possibly getting a plea deal when they go to court in November, but even with that, they may be in prison until their son is over 18 at least. I didn't have the heart to risk the foster system on my nephew. My wife has had my back on this too, and we've been working as a team. My sister and brother-in-law have signed over the title to their SUV to me, and the plan is to make it my nephew's vehicle when he gets older, since he'll be 18 in 3 years. Or we can sell it to get him something that uses a lot less fuel. I already had to pay to get the SUV back from the police impound. That's money that I'm never going to get back. When my sister and brother-in-law get out of prison in a few years, they're not exactly going to have much to their name. So taking care of their son and making sure that he grows up in a better environment feels like the least that I can do. For those wondering about the drugs, it wasn't entirely out of left field. My sister was especially troubled in her teenage years and struggled with addiction in her early 20s with the same drug. She nearly got kicked out of college for it. Our parents always dug her out of the mire and helped her back on her feet. They even paid for her rehab. We all thought that she'd been clean for a long time, but she admitted to me when I visited her in jail that her husband also had the same addiction issues. That's actually how they met. Not in rehab, but in a focus group after the rehab. They did not admit this to any of us until recently. Not sure why, but with the stress they faced in the past 2 years, falling back into old habits became easy for them. I've tried checking up on their former landlord to ask if he was okay. However, he wants nothing to do with my family. He had some pretty offensive things to say when I went over to gather my sister and brother-in-law's stuff once police gave me the okay. And the man actually threatened to pull a gun on me while I was carrying out boxes. He said that he thinks my family are all alike, a bunch of filthy white trash C-words. So I don't feel as sorry for him as I did, since he's a pretty big jerk. My nephews also confirmed this. My kids weren't exactly receptive of their cousin being around them. There's a bit of an age gap between them, and they just don't relate to one another. And while my nephew is messy, we make him clean his tent once a week, and we make him shower at least 2 to 3 times a week. We live in a warmer climate, but now that the seasons are changing, it's cooling down a little bit to where he says the tent isn't so bad. He's got a tablet, a laptop, a DVD player, and a Nintendo Switch to occupy his time, but we keep these things in the house whenever my nephew isn't home. It's way easier to steal out of a tent than a house after all. Considering how angry my nephew was before, he rarely shows his temper now. Yes, he makes it hard to get him to do his chores, but as a whole, he's shown more improvement in a couple of months than I saw in 3 years. He is extremely grateful, but he's also very solitary. We give him his space most of the time, and I make sure my kids don't bother him either. He's going through a lot right now. My nephew plays a lot of Zelda and Fortnite. At least those are 2 of the games that he plays that I know of. My kids love those games too. We've also given my nephew the old 10-speed road bike that I used to use years ago. He rides it to and from school, as we live about a mile away from the local high school. Thus far, most of the drama from him has been school-related. He had to change to a different high school and make new friends, which he wasn't particularly happy about. He really doesn't like doing his homework, and he's been fighting with his teachers. But that's a problem that many parents face on the regular. He says he's made new friends though, and I'm thankful for that. We are taking things one step at a time, and so far, it is slowly getting better. My nephew has also talked of one day getting a part-time job. For the record, he brought this up, not me or my wife. He says he needs to be ready to be independent when he's 18, but we wouldn't kick him out just for getting older. He's one of our kids now too, after all. But if he's willing to work hard and move on to working full-time or going to college, we'll encourage him. I just don't want him ending up like either of his parents. He seems to be far better off mentally without their influence now anyway. It makes me regret not wanting to take him in sooner, but I didn't know how bad things really were. To think, this all started because my sister and brother-in-law wanted my camper for their son, and those of you who said they potentially wanted it to skip town if they'd gotten a hold of it, you may very well have been right. They were on thin ice with their landlord, and were falling even deeper into drug use. Thus far though, my nephew has been completely indifferent to the camper, even though his tent is practically right next to it. He says as long as he has his own space, he's fine. Reminds me of when I was his age. I enjoyed hanging out and spending nights in the old shed that my parents made into a playhouse for me and my sister when we were kids. But we're still required to have a room at the ready for my nephew whenever a social worker checks up on us. He has the bulk of his stuff in the attic room, but he chooses to stay in the tent, which the social worker didn't seem to mind since it was my nephew's preferred place to hang out, so long as an actual room was available to him. We also have a 7-foot-tall privacy fence all around the backyard, and cameras too. That helps my nephew feel safe back there at least. So for now, I think we have things covered. I probably won't update again, as it's pretty much a guarantee that my sister and brother-in-law are going to be locked up for a few years. Our parents are especially mad at them about it, and have thanked me to no end for taking my nephew in. They want to fly over to visit this Christmas, so we can all spend time as a big family for the first time since before the pandemic. And before I go, I know some are probably going to ask where brother-in-law's family is in all of this. Couldn't they help? Why didn't my sister and brother-in-law ask them for help? Well, the answer is, they couldn't. I don't know a lot, but brother-in-law spent the latter half of his own childhood in the foster system. His family aren't in his life. I don't know who they are or where they are, and he hated them so much that he actually took my family name when he married my sister, so they aren't involved whatsoever with my nephew. And now in the comments, sometimes a troubled kid finds somebody who cares about them. For your nephew, that somebody is you. You are earning some serious karma credit. Stout hearts. Poor kid. That explains his anger and destructiveness, not to mention wanting his own space so much, aside from regular teen space. Have you thought about therapy for him? It might be the best thing to help prevent him from following his parents' footsteps in the future. And have you told him that he's welcome to stay with you past 18? He might have been counting down the days to being 18 and getting away from his parents, and maybe knowing he has a safe place to stay will also help him slow down and think about his future. Living in a contentious home, especially with addicts, really screws with a kid, and the sooner that he gets help, the better. At least he's out of that mess and safe with you now. OP replies, therapy would be a good idea in time, but we can't afford it right now. For the moment, we are just doing our best to be supportive of him and give him the space he needs. Someone replies to OP, the school may have resources to help, including state-funded help. If there is a formal foster care situation, you may qualify for funds and services for your nephew. OP says, I'll ask my nephew if he wants to find some sort of counseling, even if it's just a school counselor, but I won't make him do it if he doesn't want to. For the moment, he seems to be really enjoying the measure of independence he has living with us, and I've told him that I'm there for him if he wants to talk. That went into a completely different direction than I thought it would. His sister and brother-in-law were totally going to sell the camper for drugs. Or as someone said in the comments on his original post, sell drugs out of the camper and fund their habit. They already had the SUV to tow it. And now I'm imagining it like a food truck for drugs. Is anyone else surprised that they actually used the $100 to buy the kid a tent? Or do you think they scammed the parents as well to make a bit extra to go into their veins? I'm a little surprised that they got him the tent, but but I guess they wanted him out of the room while they were shooting up. It was the tent, or their friend was going to evict them. It sounded like the nephew was on someone's last straw. I keep imagining one of those really small tents that only fit a sleeping bag, and I feel horrified. But then I read all the stuff the kid has, and that he even chose that over the attic, and realized it is much larger than what I'm assuming. Our next post is titled, "My old co-workers are telling me that my old boss talks to them about all the issues I'm having. I found out my therapist is my old boss's husband. I started seeing a therapist a couple of months ago. Nothing wild, just general depression, winter weather getting to me, etc. It's been very helpful up until recently. In the last few days, 2 of my old co-workers called me to say my old boss was saying things like, OP basically hates herself now. I hear she's not doing too well. Really depressed. These were phone calls, and I didn't record anything because it was so unexpected. My old boss fired me in June of 2017, as we didn't get along, general underperformance, no misconduct, just obviously didn't leave on great terms. At first, I thought it might be a friend of mine divulging things to another friend in the industry, but then after looking up said old boss, I see that her husband is my therapist. Very common last name, so I never realized that they were related. I realize this is obviously problematic with a therapist, but I'm not sure what to do about it. He practices out of a leased single office space, so there's no overarching practice management/administration to report to. I also don't know if what my old boss is saying is getting into legal issues, or if it's just, well, rude. I still live in the same city, and I work the same type of job in a rather small, close-knit industry. So on one hand, I'm worried about word traveling around our small community, but on the other, I'm worried about bad blood if I make too much of a fuss. Help? Now in the comments, you can lodge an ethical complaint against his license to practice psychology. It is absolutely a violation, and while you may not have known that your boss and therapist were married, your therapist may have, which is another ethics violation. And edit, just for your edification, here are the ethics violations within your situation so far. 1. Referring to you by your name or other identifying details to someone not directly involved in your care. 2. Acknowledging you as a patient in general. Therapists should, as a rule, pretend they don't know who you are outside of the clinic. 3. Disclosing the details of your mental health to anyone outside of the clinic. And 4. Not immediately recusing themselves from giving you services once they knew about the connection between you and their spouse. As a therapist, I am horrified by this. Absolutely complain to the board about this guy. This is beyond unforgivable. As for your boss, that is a little bit more difficult. I'm not sure what legally you can do about someone gossiping. I mean, are they slandering you? Same. I just finished ethics in my clinical psych program, and I often wondered aloud what kind of idiot could violate what seems like pretty standard and obvious rules of conduct. That would be this idiot. Lots of info here about the therapist, less on handling the boss. Your old boss will probably stop discussing you once her husband learns that you were reporting him to the board. He will shut her up. If he doesn't, consider having a lawyer send her a cease and desist letter. Very unlikely to need it though. Once damage control starts, she will stop talking. And OP replies, thank you. It sounds like my therapist is screwed up enough that yes, he will make sure that my old boss keeps quiet. What sort of lawyer would I seek out for that kind of letter? Does it need to be someone who specializes in employment-related things? Be prepared for the wife to fly off the handle and get really pissed that you reported her spouse. He may try to keep her quiet, but there is no guarantee that she will actually do it. If she starts harassing you, document every instance so that you have a paper trail for the police reports. I've seen people who have gotten their spouses in trouble for violating HIPAA go after the one they think is at fault, the person who reported the spouse, for just talking about their day at work. One went so far as to blame the violation reporter for he and his wife's, the HIPAA violator, divorce, because it was the HIPAA complaint and not the fact that the now ex-wife had caught him in bed with another woman. And now on to the update. Here's a summary of the new developments. There's still a lot of slow and bureaucratic stuff going on, but the most satisfying news is that my therapist is no longer practicing. I even saw the space that he practiced out of listed as for sale on a real estate website while doing my own house hunting. New developments continued. Therapist was chatting about a client, me, to his wife, my old boss, that, it seems, he really didn't know was his wife's old employee. Large company, closely knit but not minuscule industry. I have a very peculiar family dynamic, so I think he talked about that. However, enough bits and pieces of identifying info came up that she suspected that it was me. Unbeknownst to him, she found my paper records in his office and dug through them, then thought that it was a great idea to tell my old co-workers that I was depressed and had family issues. Neat. One of my co-workers put in her 2 weeks because of a relocating spouse shortly after, and then agreed to write a formal statement of what she heard, which also helped a lot. Understandably, no one else was willing to because the company's already laid off so many people in the last year. Resolution in process. Therapist seems to be less in the wrong than I thought he was, though still in the wrong. Old boss is still awful. Therapist likely to receive some sort of reprimanding for both talking about his wife about me in that level of detail, as well as insecure record keeping. I don't know if he'll practice again. Thank you all. You were a huge help and a confidence boost that me complaining about this would actually get it somewhere and not just create more stress in my life. It's apparently led to a ton of drama at my old workplace, which has been sort of pleasant to hear updates about from afar. I'm glad to not be there anymore. I also found a new therapist who was great, and she's really helped validate that the old guy and his wife was one bad egg in a sea of otherwise well-meaning people. Now in the comments, how petty do you have to be to talk crap behind the back of someone you've had no vested interest in for 2 years, to the point that it potentially costs your spouse their job? Not just job, if this costs the spouse their license, then bye-bye career. Hope you didn't go too deeply into debt to earn that accreditation. You typically need a master's degree at minimum to become a therapist, so yikes. As someone pursuing being a practicing therapist, at minimum is correct. I work as a psychiatric technician, and I'm shocked they even let me do that with just my bachelor's. Sounds like old boss got out of this too easy. I don't know. If my partner lost me my career in this fashion, I'd see divorce on the horizon. Even if not a divorce, this for sure is going to impact their life. Loss of income is a very stressful thing. The fact that she purposefully and sneakily went through his personal work files with the intent of looking for OP's file just to be able to gossip about them to co-workers, I hope he divorces her ass. She had to have known that doing this would get back to OP, risking her husband's livelihood, and she didn't seem to give a damn. And that's where I'm going to end today's episode, guys. I do hope you enjoyed. If you did, let me know what you thought about it, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.